Together with the knife, the axe is probably the next most iconic tool of the woodsman or woman, and is very, very useful in all kinds of ways, from harvesting wood, splitting firewood, and making craft items through carving. There's all sorts of various designs, and part of what I'm really interested in is this sort of what I like to call this craft of using very simple tools. So you don't necessarily need to have a great number and variety of axes to do different jobs. If we look back though, throughout some of the history of British woodlands, particularly in the coppice industry, we do find all sorts of different designs, but we've got to bear in mind that really if you're dealing in an industrialised sort of process, which the woods were in those days, and you're doing the same action every single day, it makes sense to have a tool specifically designed for that job. So if we look at something like this, this is what we call a side axe. So instead of having two bevels, so a bevel there and a bevel there, like a conventional axe, like this one, it just has one. And this is really for squaring off and for shaping things. If you look down it, you can see the handle's offset, which also means it keeps your hands out of the way. So if all you do all day is to square beams off or square posts off, it makes good sense to have a tool that's specifically adapted for that. In a sort of bushcraft or a wilderness travel scenario, having one axe is probably more useful. And you can do everything with this axe that you can with this. It just may take a little bit longer and may take a little bit more adapting. So this has got a double bevel on, and on this particular axe, if we talk about the bevel, it's flat, which means that the sides go in to a point, like a triangle in cross section. Conventional axes, the bevel tends to be convex, so it rounds over. And the principle behind that is, if you imagine where my fingers are, that's the blade of the axe, or the very bit at the top. If it's rounded or bulged out, there's a lot more supporting metal behind that edge for a tool that's going to be swung. So on a larger axe like this, it makes sense to keep that convex bevel angle, so that if I swing it hard, because essentially it's a big knife or a big wedge on the end of a stick, it's going to land with some force. If it hits a dead knot in the wood, for example, it's much less likely to chip and blunt. If primarily all you're going to do is split stuff and hit stuff hard, it makes sense to have an axe with a longer handle, primarily because you get a lot more force behind it, but also it keeps you a lot further away from the business end, the sharp end. And some people actually prefer it to split lots of firewood with an axe of this design. I personally prefer to use a maul, which is something like this, which is a big metal wedge on the end of a stick. It doesn't get stuck quite so much. And if you're not very good at it, it's also worth getting one with a solid handle, because you hit that part of it and end up breaking the shaft of the axe if you're not careful. If you're camping, you wouldn't really want to hike with that. It probably weighs about 6 pounds and would stick right out the top of your rucksack. There are all sorts of specialised techniques for stopping your axe getting split, including flicking, which involves twisting the axe at the end of the stroke, but it takes a lot of practice and experience to do that safely. So if you're just going to primarily be splitting firewood, you may well want to stick with a splitting maul as opposed to an axe. And perhaps a good compromise is an axe like this one, which is a reasonably large size handle in that we can still swing it and use it two-handed and put a fair amount of force behind it for splitting, but it's also light enough that we can come up and strangle the neck of it and do some really sweet sort of carving and make small craft items. In terms of looking after them, these ones in particular, these are Scandinavian axes, they're carbon steel, so they will rust. You do need to think about that. If you put them away wet, they're likely to go rusty. And if you carve certain woods, this is true of all tool steels, woods such as chestnut and oak that have tannin in there, you really need to be wiping that off, because tannin will start to eat into the metal of the blade, which is why you never find an oak-handled knife, or if you do, it may not last very long.